Welcome to Behind the Thin Blue Line, a Whisper in the Shadows podcast. In each city, in every neighbourhood, on every street, they stand tall. Those in blue, guardians of our community, our protectors. But who are they really? Behind the Thin Blue Line is the podcast that takes you behind the badge, beyond the headlines, and into the hearts of those who serve and protect. We're here to break down barriers and to tear down the walls of misunderstanding. We're here to listen to their stories, their triumphs, their fears. Ever wonder what it's like serving undercover? Or what's the real-life impact of policing? Or how they cope with trauma? Listen as we step into the shoes of those who walk the thin blue line. You have heard my true stories of what it's really like to be an undercover cop. I want to give a voice to all those living amongst us, unseen and unnoticed, who have put their life on the line being a police officer. Hopefully to give you, the listener, a glimpse into something you will likely never get to experience. Uncover the complex world of law enforcement and the raw human experiences behind the badge. Join me, Jason Somerville, your host and a former police officer myself, as we navigate through these stories on Behind the Thin Blue Line. Let's go and meet our next guest. Welcome to Behind the Thin Blue Line, a Whisper in the Shadows podcast, where I explore the human side of policing and law enforcement. I hope you're enjoying our conversations with former and current police officers as I delve into the complexity of policing and how it affects the human side of police as a person. I'm Jason Somerville, and I was a Queensland police officer for nearly 14 years, as well as working undercover for over 2 of those years. Hopefully, you've been listening to my stories of my time undercover through my alter ego, Michael Bates. Well, I've decided it's time we heard from other police and let them tell their stories. Today, I'm chatting with Mark Battersby, who is a former Victorian police officer. Good afternoon, Mark. How are you today?
G'day, I'm very well.
That's
Jason?
good. Thank you for agreeing to join the podcast and for agreeing to have a chat about your policing experiences.
Yep, no
Now,
worries.
what I generally like to do is start off, I guess, with a little bit of a background in regards to when you were a police officer, how long you did it for, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I joined in 1981 into the Police Academy in Victoria at the tender age of 19. And yeah, look, I could say various things, I suppose. Just a quick intro at the moment. I did 15 years, or nearly 15 years. It was mostly on the front line or general duties, as we called it, divvy vans, watch houses, etc. I did spend a short time the police air wing.
Yep.
There's a story there, but anyway, so that's sort of very very brief intro to the policing side of my life, I suppose.
No, that's okay. Was it mainly metropolitan, or did you do country work as well?
I did some country, yeah, not far out of Melbourne. It would be classed as country for a couple of years, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, how did you become a police officer? What was the process along there? Like, did you always want to be a police officer when you were growing up? And what did you want to be when you were growing up?
Well, I think actually I wanted to be a fighter pilot. That's very unusual for a young man, so I did actually have an interview with the Air Force prior to the police, but
Yep.
really and that wasn't successful at that time. I was very young, but I was playing football basically, footy down here in Melbourne.
Yep.
And there was probably half a dozen young guys that hadn't been in the police force for long, and we got on pretty well. I liked their company and playing footy and having beers with them and talking to them. And they'd talk about what they were doing, and I thought, well, that sounds a bit more exciting than doing uni lectures that I was doing in an engineering degree at the time. So
Yep.
I applied, and the rest is history with that. Got in, and away we went.
What engineering were you doing?
Electrical and communications.
And what was the plan?
Well, there was a pathway mapped out, actually. My father was fairly high up in Telstra.
Yep.
And so it was, I was always good at mathematics and that sort of thing. So I suppose I was steered into that to end up at Telstra and, have a big career there. But the two problems of that, the two main problems is my father was there. Yep. And the second problem was that I wanted something a bit more, people orientated, I think.
And you couldn't get much more people orientated than policing. Did that cause any issues? Did your father, was he happy that you joined the police and didn't follow him in his footsteps?
No, no, my family
Oh,
weren't happy at all. No, but
didn't like don't like the colour blue.
I just think they thought for me it wasn't. It was a bit sort of under standard or under par for me as a person, if you like.
Yeah.
Not quite the right fit, but whatever. They hadn't had a lot. I don't have any police in the family, and as I said, I got to know what policing was about to a certain extent through playing footy with these blokes.
Um, uh, did they eventually warm to it?
Not really.
Not really.
I think the only one that really supported me was my mother.
Yeah.
She thought, "Oh no, he'll be right." But look, I was only 19, and as I think, they just saw me as a school kid. What
Well,
the
yeah.
heck? What the
I,
heck is he going into this job for?
I mean, I did it at 21, and I'm pretty sure my parents still thought of me as a school kid too. Mind you, I did look like one. Uh, so,
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about your journey. So, you've gone
Mm.
into the police. How long was the academy at that stage?
I think about 6 months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you were probationary for 12 months.
Yeah, 2 years, I think, in
2
total.
years. Okay.
In
And
Victoria.
where are you able to say, or do you want to say where you were stationed? What parts of Melbourne?
Oh, yeah, I can give you where I was,
Yeah.
names, the bosses that I hated, all the rest of it, whatever you want.
No,
I'm
let's
not
not go that
practicing about
far.
this stuff.
I was going to say,
This
let's
is
not go
how I
that
roll with life.
far. So
I think
what
this is
areas
why
did you work in?
I will tell you, but I think this is a key to my recovery that I'm very honest
Yep.
with myself, and I've had to go through 12-step addiction programs to the
Yep.
alcohol and all the rest of it. And the only way to really get through and recover with have a strong recovery is to be honest. But anyway, look, I was in the city for a while. I did a training station out in the outer east. In the city. I mean, just to go through that without getting into what happened there or didn't or all the rest of it.
Yep.
So I ended up going to Hawthorn, I think. I don't know whether you know where these
Yeah.
places are.
Yeah. I've lived in Melbourne, so I've got a fair idea.
Okay, for a couple of years. And then I got it in my head. Look, well, basically it was like, you know, young bloke, if there's all these opportunities in this sort of job, I'm going to go for it. So I ended up applying for a few things and I got the air wing, the police air wing. Now, without going into it too much at the moment, but unfortunately my alcoholism was roaring, or I didn't really realise that. I'm sure some people must have known.
Did
And I ended up drinking on a training exercise, so getting
mm,
violently drunk, not violently drunk, very drunk. And there's a story of all that. And of course, they decided it wasn't good to have on call police air wing people, pissed at home.
did you actually have a pilot's license?
No, no. So
No.
I was training to be an air observer, I think they called it.
Okay.
So air crew, learning how to do rescues and
Yep.
searches, that sort of thing was probably more prominent then than actual police work. I think they've merged into more of the, tracking cars around and that sort of
Yeah.
stuff than they did then. Yeah,
So was that a helicopter or was that fixed wing back in those days?
yeah, helicopter mainly, yeah.
Helicopter. Okay. Fair enough. I
Mm,
one of the joys of, I guess, my policing experience, and it wasn't actually
mm,
me working, but because I was a police officer, when I was in LA, I got to do a shift, an 8-hour shift with the helicopter
mm,
crew in
mm,
LA in one of the police forces there. And
mm,
that was eye opening. That was really, really eye opening, to the
mm.
point where we're actually getting shot at. They said, "Don't worry, we're a little bit too high." I
They,
went,
they do a lot of shooting over there.
they do, yes, at each other and at police. All right, so
So just to round that out, then, so
yep,
I ended up out at my last few years or so. I was out at a station called Murrelbach.
yes,
And that's where a bit of country came in. I was seconded to Alinda up in the hills for a couple of years. And
okay.
that was, yeah.
What did you enjoy about policing?
Well, I always enjoyed I went in basically to save the world, as you do.
Yep,
And, young men, we can do anything. We're fit, strong. It was great to run down crooks. It was good to be. I really liked the fact that the general duties, as they call it, which really underplays really what it is in my mind. So you're out in a divvy van to get the call. Somebody's stabbing someone or trying to on the street, and you're the men to go and keep the peace. Grab the crooks,
Yes.
throw them in the divvy van, and give everyone a big kiss and a hug, and then go and do all the paperwork, which no one wanted to do. Of course, well, I didn't want to do it.
Well,
I could. It's
no one ever wants.
quite
No one ever
capable,
wants to do
and even
paperwork.
no. Well, on reflection, how stupid is it? I mean, probably half the time you're doing paperwork. I mean, you're not.
Yeah.
That's not what you're there for. And I've spoken to some female friends of mine that weren't in the job, but they said, we'd have been quite happy to have the role. We'd be hired. We'd be at the station. You come in, dump your crooks off and all that, and they do the paperwork. I mean, that's a very simple view of it, but
There are ways that I'm sure they could. Yeah, like you're right. Probably about 50% of your time is spent doing paperwork. For the other 50% of time of dealing with dead shits, basically.
Mm.
I was going to ask you something in regards to so back in those days, that would have been before we had things like capsicum spray and tasers and that
Mm.
sort of stuff as well.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
it just would have been a baton and your wit to
Well,
try and
most of the
calm some
time
of
it
these
was,
people down.
headlock down on the ground, handcuffs. It was pretty much most of the time. There was
Yeah,
usually a bit of talking beforehand. If they responded to a bit of talking, then that's okay. If they don't, bang, and I feel really sorry for them these days because they've got so much shit on their belt and everything. I don't know how they walk.
it's very hard to sit in the police car, that's for sure. Especially
Well, it
when
would be.
you've got a little 5'3", 40-kilogram female who has to put all that stuff on her belt. That's why they've gone to the vests now, so they can get some of that stuff off their vests, off their belts.
Mm.
All right. So, where did you stay at Constable the whole way through? Did you get
I
promoted?
was a senior connie. I took promotion, did exams for senior connie,
Yeah.
and quite frankly, the way I viewed it, I saw, sergeant may have been a consideration, but really after that, they're all wankers and just, trying to chop each other's heads off to get to the top. And
Yeah.
I joined the job to be a copper, not a I don't know, management person or whatever.
Not a corporate climber.
Not a corporate climber, no.
So that would have, and depending on where you are in Queensland, if you're a
Mm,
senior connie, you get there's some managerial roles. I mean, there was some stations where as a senior connie you were the officer in
mm,
charge, whereas
mm.
other stations it was a sergeant. Did it work the same way where you were?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I mean, when I was in the country, sometimes I'd be on my own.
Yeah.
For probably half the time, whether it be day shift or some of the evening shifts, we tried to, pair up on the evening shifts.
Yep.
But basically, senior Connie is an unsung, leader in the field. Really, everybody looks to you when the shit hits the fan because they're all very junior.
Yep, that's right.
And,
And when it doesn't go right, everyone up above you tends to
yeah,
ride the ship back down the hill. Um,
yeah.
so just talking about the fact that you worked one up a lot and that sort of
Mm,
thing.
mm,
Obviously, we didn't have the news cycles when I was in the police, and
mm,
so you wouldn't have had them newbies. I was 10 years after you.
mm,
Uh, do you think that it's more dangerous today to be a police officer and there's more requirement for people to work two up rather
mm,
than the ability to work one up, or do you think that's a figment of the 24-hour news cycle?
There might have been a couple of questions there, but I think you're asking, do you think it's more
Yeah.
dangerous now, just full
Yeah.
stop? And Um, I think it's a loaded question in a lot of ways. I would say yes, but I would say the main reason for that is because they're so worried about health and safety and everything that they've managed themselves out of a job, basically. Not the run of the rank and file. We're talking about the management and the way they manage.
And
They just
that's
don't
had to.
seem to. Yeah,
Sorry, go on.
they don't seem to be able to. In my day, it was quite evident the way we were trained and everything. that if you had a head on your shoulders, once you got your experience, you're allowed to use discretion.
Yep.
It's what Mark says, and what Mark says goes,
Do
because
you think
he's
that's
there.
been
And
taken away these days?
oh yeah, oh absolutely, you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it must be well, it is excruciating because I talked to plenty that have got out over the last little while, and because I'm part of a group that meet every fortnight here
Yep.
for support, because it's just the PTSD and the ramifications that are rampant.
Yep.
And so I help out with that. I actually work as a counsellor now,
Okay.
but we can talk more about that later.
Yeah,
But
I want to touch on that. I want to come back to that because there's the discussions that we've had
yeah,
offline.
so yeah,
Want to
so
go
I
back
would
to
say,
that.
look, I was very good actually. I'm very verbose and very good at connecting with people. So most
Yep.
of the time, even if it was a gunpoint, I'd make a connection and resolve the situation. Everybody gets to live. But there's not a lot of coppers, full stop, that have that attitude. They just, I think, a lot now. Probably, I hesitate to say this, but there might be a better way. But never mind. They don't quite have the brain power. Now, maybe it's more to do with the training to like it's a higher level of
Yeah.
thinking to walk into a situation. There's somebody that's quite off their nut, obviously. One I'm just thinking of is where this fella, he was in a unit, he'd locked himself in, he'd poured petrol over himself and over the head of a woman
Yeah.
who was there standing beside him. And I got to probably about 10, 15, 20 minutes in, I had him release the hostage just by talking to him. And had him isolated, and there was a lot of other coppers there. But to cut a long story short, in the end, I told the boss what I was going to do. He didn't like it. In fact, he didn't want me to do initially, which was to take my gun off, which I
Yeah.
did, and I've done it before. I've done
Yep.
this before. This is not bullshit.
Yeah.
And the other fellas that seen me do it before, they took their gun off. I handpicked two or three others, and we went. Well, of course, we grabbed him in the end when we got close.
Yeah.
But the boss, he said, "Well, certainly not going to get any medals or anything, Mark, because my write up will be nothing like what happened." And this is the honesty of the bullshit that happens in these organisations. I'm sure it hasn't got any better. That really the people, inspector and above or whatever they are, you've got them there. They're about their own ass. They're about
Yep.
their own self-importance, and
Yep.
they have no concern at all for the welfare of the people underneath them.
No, and
Generally speaking,
yeah, and that rings true with the people I've spoken to.
So look, what I did, when I relay this, I mean, I get comments of people like fairly high up in counselling and psychology, and they say, well, that's very brave, but not everybody's capable of doing that, and I accept that. I accept that. But
Well,
I make the call. Hey, I made the call.
That's right. But I was just going to circle back to a point you made where you said that the brain power or the high function you need to use to be able to make those decisions and be able to talk people down. Do you think it's a fact that they don't have it, or do you think it's a fact that they haven't been trained to use it? Because I know when I went through, and I was one of the first 400 after the Fitzgerald inquiry, so we were taught all these wonderful university things. But one of the things we were taught was how to make decisions on our own. And we were given training along the lines of, if someone was trying to commit suicide, then, trigger words, not to say what you can say, trying to talk people down, that sort of stuff. I don't actually know if they're taught those sorts of things in today's day and age. Because at school and at university now, you're taught, remember this, it's going to be in
That's
your
right.
test. Remember this.
Yeah.
It's not as a free thinking. Yeah, it's not a free thinking, I guess, education anymore. And we're getting people from universities going into policing now because that's what makes policing professional.
Yeah. Yeah. So an interesting experience, eh? But as far as the danger, I think that it's just as dangerous. I mean, I dealt with people. They might not have been on ice, but they're on something else.
Yep.
There's certainly plenty of alcohol around and weapons and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, that was one example. But there were plenty of other times when you did nip it in the bud pretty early because it's a few of it good strong fellas overpowering people, and that's where I said, look, I've got 2 daughters and a wife. I love women, but they shouldn't be on the front line. They shouldn't be on a divvy van. It's just crazy, absolutely crazy.
Fair enough. I know quite a few female coppers that would disagree with that, and I know quite a few.
I'm sure they might disagree, but they don't have the strength. They don't have the physical strength. They just don't. There might be the odd one out of 1 in a million, but
okay, fair enough. Now, so 15 years, so mid-90s would have been when you finally pulled the pin.
Yeah. About
so
96.
That early 90s period, there was a very much a shift in, I guess, from outside and from police in the other states, because I'd just been sworn in. I actually did an undercover job based with Victorian crims. So I went and spent some time in Victoria and with the homicide squad. There seemed to be very, very much a shoot first, ask questions later type thing in the early 90s. Is that...
As I said, I think it's an individual thing,
Yeah.
I had a mindset where I told myself, I remember I had the conversation with myself, if you like, that everyone lives. Mark goes somewhere and everyone lives.
Yep.
So with that goal in mind, that's what I did. I do everything I could, but still maintaining my own safety and that of others, obviously. And so, I just found that unless you had the worst narcissistic crook you'd imagine, and I dealt with a couple of them, obviously, you can make a connection with people. They're not really fair dinkum. You say, mate, if you don't put that gun down, I'm coming across to fucking grab it out of your hands.
Yeah.
And so it's all psychology, isn't it?
It is, but I guess in that particular part of history, if we want to call it that, there were a lot of crims in Melbourne that were prepared to shoot you even if you did try and come and take it out of their hands.
Yeah, there probably wasn't as many as purported, I don't think, but anyway.
Right. And that's sort of where I was getting to with that question was, was that a particularly violent time with people who didn't respect police in the criminal?
Well, we obviously had, the bombing and the execution of the 2 from Roll Street, which were pretty close together.
Yep.
And that definitely affected, at all levels, but particularly if you're out on a divvy van, you suddenly approached calls that would have been almost benign prior as pretty high level, high level risk.
What sort of impact does that have on you personally?
Well, I think it's what policing does anyway. I mean, eventually, you're on high alert 24/7. You never come down. There's always somebody somewhere that's trying to get you.
Do you still have that hyper? Not sensitivity is probably not the right word, but hyper awareness, hyper vigilance rather.
I don't think hyper vigilance. From my understanding, is where you virtually don't sleep much and that sort of thing. Whereas I sleep like a baby, or in fact better than a baby probably now. I do have my 7-8 hours sleep, and that's non-negotiable. The world can go bye-byes until I wake up for breakfast, but it's taken me a while to get to that. To that. But what you're talking about is still there. In fact, there's an example just today. I'm driving down the road, and it's very windy here in Melbourne, and I'm noticing all this debris everywhere, and then I look up because I'm looking at trees and things,
Yep.
And I see this branch has straddled a power line, and then I see power lines down, and people are just streaming past, streaming past. I mean, this is a very dangerous situation, So I call it in. I didn't do much more, and the fire brigade turned up, and blah blah blah. So I guess what I'm saying is that, and you might have this as well, I'm sure you do, but I notice things out and about that the average person just doesn't see, or if they see something, they don't know what they're looking at, and that sort of stuff.
Do you find yourself looking around more? And this is a question that when I drive, I'll it's like I'm still in a police car, and you're looking at everything that's going on. I still look as I drive past. I still look at cars to see what the
Yeah,
driver's like or who's in the passenger seat,
yeah.
and that sort of thing. And I'm doing it subconsciously.
Mm.
Do you still
Yeah,
have that
I
sort of
don't know about,
reaction?
there might be a subconscious, but I think mine's conscious a lot of the time. I'm, you just, I'm happy with that because it's not going to go away, and I think it's actually a good thing.
Oh, so do
Um,
I agree.
the
It was
safety of others and yourself, your family.
it was just brought up to
Um,
me the other day that I
yeah,
do it a lot. Went, "Well,
you
if
got to
you
be
really
careful,
notice."
but I'm not an idiot, so I've actually followed cars down the street that have been all over the place, but they're going at a
Okay.
slow speed. And when I've got through and been talking to the copper at D24, I introduce myself so they know who I am and the observations. They go, "Yeah, that's fair enough." And I said, "Listen, if they take off, mate, I'm in my private car, my Mazda. I'm not following them. I'm not
Yeah.
following at speed. So I'm not. I have been there, and we'll probably get into that later of how I was really affected. And there was a time when, well, I was a madman. I was a madman for a few years, for sure.
I'll come to that. So
Yeah.
so you've done 15 years. You've got to senior connie,
Yeah.
all in uniform.
So mostly in uniform, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what prompted you to leave?
Well, I couldn't get out of bed. That's I
Yeah.
was I was so badly PTSD with depression and everything, which they didn't call it PTSD then, they just called it job stress.
Yep.
Well, that's what the GP called it.
Yep.
And so I was bullied to resign. Actually, basically came to me on my deathbed, if you like, or sick bed, and said, you need to resign, son. And if you don't, we'll fight you at court on the on the compensation and all that." So I had some real assholes to deal with.
And look, I appreciate
Yeah.
this is sensitive to you and personal to you, but can you go into that? Do you feel like going into that a little bit more? Are you able to go into that a little bit more in regards to how did you
Well,
get to that point of
mm.
I don't want to get out of bed? I'm assuming was it at home? Was it in hospital when they
No,
came to
I was
you and
at
said,
home. Yeah,
"Yep"?
yeah.
When you're at home,
Well, look,
how did it get to that
I
point?
believe. Yeah, well, I believe on reflection now that 18 months into the job, I went to a fatal involving a 2-year-old girl.
Yep.
And the other thing that happened with that, I was with a partner, but I was right in the centre of the CBD in Melbourne,
Yep.
working out of Russell Street. And the D24 operator was calling for backup, and not one person came to give us any support. And they would have been there, and we're in the city.
It was.
And so,
Was there a debrief about it afterwards, and was there a reason for
yeah,
it?
right.
Oh,
Yeah, plenty of piss. Plenty of piss. No,
yeah.
no such thing as a debrief then. No
Okay.
such thing. There was, as I said, there was absolutely no concern for the welfare of the individual officers, whatever you went to.
Yeah.
There might have been the odd sergeant around that took a bit of interest, but usually not really. And but I believe I mentioned that because I believe that was the start of my PTSD. Now looking back,
So that you said that was 18 months in. So you've carried
yeah,
that for
yep,
15, 14 years.
yeah, and everything else. And I'm sure I'm not the
Yeah.
only cop that does that.
Oh
Everything.
no,
I mean,
I
it
definitely.
sort of culminated in eventually, if you like, the one that really did it all. Well, it
Yeah.
was an internal thing because I was, and look, I was drinking on duty. Eventually, I
Yep.
was stuffed, and any opportunity that came up, that's what I was doing. So I'm not going to go into all that right now, but basically, I was charged with drinking on duty,
Yep.
and the other fellow, they were after him for some other things as well, apparently. But anyway, but eventually, about 1 o'clock in the morning, we pulled up this bloke because he just about ran into us with his lights off and all that sort of thing. And I ended up with. I was just going to do a breath test, but I ended up
Yep.
rolling around the roadway with this prick, and he had his hand on my gun button. He was trying to
Yep.
get my gun out of the holster. So the only thing that was another one, lack of support. My partner there, I don't know why he wouldn't come and help me, but he wouldn't. He got on the radio, and I don't know why he bothered doing that because we're in the middle of nowhere. But anyway, yeah, so I just had to belt the hell out of this bloke. Fortunately, I am pretty strong, and once I get going, there's no stopping me. So I just bashed him in the head until he took his hand off the gun.
And
And but that sort of did it, in as much as I'm going, this is, I've got a young family. This is bullshit.
yeah,
I've had enough of this stuff. But with that, it's not that easy because that's all I knew since I was 19. So what am I going to do to feed my family? And at that
and
point,
that's very true. So from that point to when they've come to you and said, you know, don't fight us, you're resigning. Did you
mm,
have much of a thought process about what am I going to do? Or was it just a thought in the back of your mind? And that thought in the
no,
back,
look,
because it was in your back of your mind, kept you in the job.
I was just struggling to live one shift or one day at a time.
Yep.
So I obviously, well, not obviously, you don't know, but I had thoughts of returning to the engineering degree, which I eventually did.
Yep.
Um, so it was really until my system said, you're not going anywhere, you're certainly not going back into that.
Yep.
Nothing really. And the drinking on duty. But even then, see, they looked at it like, oh, what an arsehole, he's drinking on duty. Well, they were probably drinking as well, or had done in their career, and
Well,
turned around and
I,
said the
I,
best way out of this is to charge Mark and he's the scapegoat.
I know of at least one homicide squad
Mm.
detective who was drinking on duty and ended up crashing a car at the top of St Kilda Road. But and you probably remember that because that would have been just before you left, I reckon.
Okay. Mm.
So there were a lot of people that were doing it.
Mm.
The homicide squad in Melbourne, they had a soft drink fridge. There was no soft
Mm.
drink in it.
No.
It was
Yeah.
just full of beer and drinks at the end of the
Yeah.
shift. Um,
So, yeah, go on.
so you've come to this conclusion. Can you expand a little bit? And you don't have to, obviously, because I appreciate
Mm.
you know the effects. But when they've come to you, was it an inspector? Was it a high commissioned officer? Do they just come around and say,
Oh,
"Here's
no,
the
it was,
paperwork"?
they were all involved, but basically the senior sergeant at my station was given the job to resolve things, I guess.
Yeah.
I just put it that I was bullied because, you know what, I don't really remember much about that period of time.
Okay.
But in hindsight, there was no, oh, Mark, it's terrible. You're sick from the job, all that. It was like, how do we make ourselves, how do we make him disappear?
Yeah. And not have it and not
So,
have come back on us. Yeah. And that's a common
mm,
story that you hear from people, especially that up till about the late 90s to
mm,
early 2000s,
mm,
and it still happens now. But I think there's more of an awareness from some senior
mm,
police of what you would have been going through if it had been
mm,
today.
mm, mm,
It doesn't mean that they definitely would have accepted it. Okay, so
mm.
the period for you to leave, what was that? Was it a month, 2 months? What sort of time
I was
frame
a
did
bit
they give you?
longer. My memory is I had about 9 months sick leave or something
Yep,
up my sleeve, so I took all that.
yep,
So look, it is a bit cloudy. I resigned. I think I just eventually went and did some casual work or something. During that time, decided, well, and talking with my wife, of course,
yep.
and still young enough to go to university, and maybe this engineering degree might be it, and be the future.
Did you go back in that 9 months?
No, no, no.
No.
This would have been maybe a year after I resigned or something like that.
Okay.
And they accepted me back into second year because I'd already done a couple of years.
Yep.
And so I went right through that over a few years, full time.
Yep.
Wasn't easy for probably a couple of main reasons. One of them is that any study at that level is, difficult. They don't make it easy. You've got to pass exams and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's a bit of a bugger when it comes to education, isn't it?
Yeah. And so there was that, and I think just loss of identity. I really didn't know who I was. In hindsight, and that's what we try and do now, what we're aiming for, I think we've still got a long way to go, is that, police, like a lot of other areas, service areas need a proper transition program,
Oh,
and they need
definitely.
and they need to be led through it. As much as they want to, of course, tailored to the individual. Because you really suffer a loss of identity, and I think particularly in a job like that. But well, for me, I mean, there's a bit more awareness. I have very little support because people around you, they're going, "What the hell is going on?
Yep.
What is wrong with him?" Like just go. Even my wife, well, that was my first wife, but go up the street and get another job, and she'll be sweet. Don't worry about it. But it
In, in,
didn't.
re- so in regards to that loss of identity, and this is something that I'm
Mm,
exploring at the moment in regards
mm,
to the
mm,
counselling that I'm going through, is we're talking about that
mm,
for a multitude of reasons, because it manifests itself in other
mm.
in my current career. Um, do you think that it's because of the type of people that go into policing that they pin themselves to that identity?
Yeah, look, I think it could be anything, but to do with helping others. It's on that
Yep.
scale, I believe, or in that bag. And we are well. I can only speak for myself. I've met plenty of others. We're passionate and we just give our all. We give our all, and I think it was a job that required that. It wasn't even those who pretended to say, "Oh, no, it's just a job, and I'll just do this." But along comes the next job that's a multiple fatality or something, or whatever it is. And, you don't just go home and say, "What's for dinner, love?" I just did my 9 to 5 and I've signed off, beauty.
Yeah.
You're very invested, and, I had a bloke who I actually knew fairly well that I worked with in the younger days, and he became the head of what do they call it? The president of the police association.
Yep.
And he said, "Oh, Mark, you're just too invested." And I'm going, "You're full of shit." What are you supposed to do? So, unless you're a complete narcissist, maybe he was, but um, we're not just sitting in a factory, painting, one box blue and one box red.
No, but the expectation is at the end of your shift, you just go home and put it all behind you.
Well, I don't know whether I don't know. I don't
No,
really know.
from the organisation I'm talking about.
Perhaps I don't know, mate. I don't look as far as that's concerned. My focus is on obviously my recovery,
Yep.
and also the recovery of others that have walking a similar track to me. Been popped
Yep.
out, pushed out. As far as the police force goes, they can look after. I'm not. I'm not interested.
No.
Because,
Sorry.
but I just want to make that clear that some people talk about, how can we change the management of the police force? We won't. It's like
No.
the army and the military. It's a mindless machine. It'll be like this in another 100 years. It won't change.
No, that's true. I guess the point I was making is you were saying that
Yeah.
people who have a normal job, it's not like you
Mm.
just finish at 5 o'clock and you go home and it's not worry about it. What I'm saying is, though, the expectation of the organisation has been for many years that at the end of your shift you just clock off and you go home and you shouldn't worry about it. But we know, because of the fact that the jobs that you go to, that triple fatality, you're going to be thinking about that, maybe not today, but in a week's time, in 12 months' time, in 20 years' time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with that because, some people call it like a bucket and you're putting, water into it for each whatever incident is that really does affect you or
Yep.
affect anyone, really. So I could see that probably a good 10 years probably before I got out, before I finished, my bucket was full. I was just like a hulk of a mess, just a shell of a man,
Yep.
How on earth I did the job, I don't know. I don't know. Really don't know.
You obviously had. I
Mm,
don't know if crutch is the right word, but you had
mm,
things that you used to get you through that. And for
mm,
people who don't understand why that's necessary, they're never going to understand. But
mm,
it's that type of job that they're the sorts of things
mm,
that people use to get them through every
mm.
day. That's all we have time for on today's episode. Join us next week for part 2 of this conversation with Mark Battersby, where we start to discuss what he actually did after he left the police, and delve more into things like support groups and some interesting finds that he's made about himself. We'll look forward to speaking to you next week.
Thank you for joining me on Behind the Thin Blue Line, where I have conversations with current and former police officers and they get to tell their stories. I hope you've enjoyed that episode. In the next episode, we'll again explore the human side of policing through more conversations with police officers from around the world. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Lastly, if you're a current or former police officer, I would love to chat to you about your experiences, or if you're feeling dangerous, tell your stories on my podcast. Please get in contact by my email, which is whisperintheshadowspodcast@gmail.com. I look forward to you joining me next week.